Hey guys, it's Shelby. Today we're going to be talking about non-sustainable brands that have sustainable lines. This video came super highly requested, so I hope you like it. If you appreciate this video, give it a thumbs up. It took me a long time to read through all of these companies' policies, or lack thereof, honestly. So the least you could do for me is like, give this video a like. Okay. I just want to preface this video by saying that I don't personally endorse any of these brands. And so my philosophy personally is if you buy something secondhand, its environmental footprint is next to zero. It was already destined for the landfill. It's already in the waste stream. And when we talk about buying things secondhand, a lot of the issues surrounding sustainable fashion and sustainable goods goes away. The accessibility issue in terms of location and where you live and what you have physical access to. Financial accessibility is very different when we talk about secondhand because it is the most affordable way to get nearly anything. And so for me, when all of those options are available, why we would give our money to the brands that I'm going to be discussing today doesn't really make sense to me. I've done a few other videos ranking brands in a series that I'll link below. This is my 4th episode, I believe. But this one is different because if you remember my ranking tier, it goes from God tier, which is like the greatest of all time, down to I don't think anyone should fucking buy this. I'm going to use the same tier list, but I have very different feelings about it because really all of these brands are starting with probably not good, I wouldn't buy them. There are some brands that I think should just be completely outright avoided, and there are some that I just personally, for me, the way I live my life, I wouldn't buy them. That's kind of my ranking system. So I'm gonna pull my laptop over here just a little bit. I'm borrowing my sister's laptop because I spilled water on mine. Don't mind me. As always, I asked you what brands you wanted to see, and these are the most highly requested ones. If I missed something that you really, really want to know about, leave it in the comments, and it'll be in the next episode of this series. The first brand, of course, is one that gets talked about so much for their greenwashing efforts, and that is H&M. I'd say they were one of the first fast fashion brands to start a non-sustainable line, and people were like, no. I do not think that producing and releasing new goods on a weekly basis to entice people to constantly be upgrading their wardrobes, I do not think that that business model can be sustainable. So we're starting with that baseline. I just want to be really, really clear about that. But I will say that when taking into context all of the brands that I looked into, their lines and their practices that they're aiming towards and all that sort of stuff, H&M was the best. Now, obviously, I can't just say that without telling you why. I'm about to tell you. They have a lot of initiatives and goals set out for them to achieve, which would be great if they did achieve all of these goals. My problem with all of the goals that they outline on their website is that they're not held accountable to anyone else to meet those goals other than themselves. So for me, when a brand can pass that greenwashing onto actually being held accountable and being sustainable, when they cross that threshold for me, it is when they get any form of third-party certification, a third-party, non-biased person looking at their business model and their practices and saying, yes, this is good, or no, you're really just half-assing it. Those third parties typically rate what a business has already done. You don't just get brownie points for what you're working on. Let me read through some of the things that they have goals, and then I'll also walk you through a few of the things they've already achieved. They want to be climate neutral through their entire supply chain by 2030, and they want to be climate positive by 2040. They're going to use the calculations that they do have, and they're going to actively work to reduce it by those scopes that they've calculated in those steps, which is more information than a lot of businesses give when they say they're just going to reduce their carbon emissions. They also have a goal of biodiversity ambitions, which is them working to prevent and reduce overall impact on biodiversity, and they want to reduce that from their current footprint by 50% by 2030. And when they break down those bigger goals into smaller goals of how they're gonna get there, they say things like using 100% recycled or sustainably sourced materials by 2030, being toxic free by 2030. They also have other goals that are incredibly vague. Things like by 2020, all cotton sourced for H&M Group will come from more sustainable sources. The sources we use are just going to be more sustainable than whatever crap we're using now. That's how that reads to me, because more sustainable is the most vague claim I think I've ever heard. So those are some of the goals that they have, which all sound pretty good, and to be honest, they publish a full sustainability report, which is really helpful, probably where they talk more about their calculated GHGs and where they're going to reduce them and all that sort of stuff. That's incredibly transparent. They actually got an award, I think last year or the year before, for being one of the most transparent brands that there are. I think fashion brands that there are. And they took great pride in being the most transparent brand out there. It's a really, really low bar set. Okay, I'm just gonna tell you that. But the purpose of transparency is to give the consumer the ability to make a judgment on what you're doing. It doesn't mean what you're doing is the best. It just means you're telling people what you're doing. Something else I noticed by reading through all of this is that they are mostly setting goals, but don't have a lot to show for what they've already accomplished. And pretty much the only thing that they talk about that they've already accomplished that they're very proud of is their clothing recycling system. Now there's a lot of speculation out there about where these clothes are actually going, if they're actually being recycled in a sustainable closed loop system, but H&M doesn't say that they use all of those materials to recreate something at their stores. They just say that they recycle it. And from what I've seen and what has been speculated is that that stuff is not actually being reused in a sustainable way. What I think would be interesting is to contrast that with how many they sold, right? So they took back 145 million t-shirts, which I am positive is probably a teeny tiny fraction of the amount of t-shirts that they sold that year, let alone all the years before they created this recycling system. Honestly, there's a lot more to dig into, and I could spend an incredible amount of time on just H&M and how a lot of this is ultimately greenwashing because their entire business model is quite literally not sustainable for the amount of resources it uses. But in terms of non-sustainable brands and the initiative that they're taking, the goals that they've set and the things they're doing to work towards it, I honestly think H&M is the best one I've seen so far. Even though the baseline for this is so different than the baseline for all the other brands that I've talked about in this series, I still just find it incredibly difficult to put them anywhere else. But I do think the H&M is mostly good, or at least what they're working towards is mostly good, keeping in mind the baseline is not the same for this as my other videos, okay? Okay. Next up is Gap. So this is a brand that is not sustainable within itself as a parent company, but has a sustainable line or sub-brand. And the sub-brand that so many of you asked about is actually called Athleta. I think there's a lot of interesting discussion to happen here because I've been asked this on a lot of panels that I've been on recently. How does a brand like Gap owning or releasing a line like Athleta fit within the sustainability realm? Do we not support it as environmentalists because our money inevitably still goes to this incredibly not sustainable corporation? Or do we tell that not sustainable corporation that if they want to survive in the new market where we are supporting sustainable things, we need you to do more of this thing that we are supporting, not this thing that we don't support? Of course, there are other ways to tell a brand what you want to see more of than just buying their stuff. So definitely take those steps first. But I think that this is a really good example of a big brand that I wouldn't support owning a smaller brand that I think is incredibly sustainable. So Athleta is a B certified corporation. And like I said for H&M, all of the claims that they make are great, fine, and dandy. But the way I see it, when you are not verified by a third party, I think I heard it explained in one of Levi's recent videos. He said that it's basically like the teacher asking you what your grade is and you telling them, but they don't check it. And whenever you actually hire a third party to be certified, that is the teacher looking at your work and telling you your grade. And so basically what's happening with Athleta is they have a teacher who is grading them. They're not grading themselves like H&M is. And so I find that to be incredibly, really cool. So similarly to how H&M had goals in the future and they hadn't met them yet, Athleta had goals in the past that last year they did meet. So by 2020, 80% of all of their materials were to be sourced from recycled materials or other types of materials that are deemed sustainable. And they outline what that means and why. They also have a special production technique that helps save water in the garment making process. And by 2020, they wanted at least a quarter of all of their clothing to be made with said technology, which they met that goal. They've diverted 80% of their waste from their stores from landfill. And for those of you who don't know, the term zero waste was initially meant to be an industrial term for businesses like Athleta to implement in their supply chains, because for every pound of trash that we produce, there is at least 7 times that behind the scenes. And so the purpose of zero waste was to actually reduce the amount of waste that happens behind the scenes. And the actual definition for zero waste is sending less than 10% of your overall waste footprint to landfill. So the fact that Athleta has made it to 80% not going to landfill, they're getting incredibly close to being zero waste, which is great. And they also had a goal through their fair trade program to impact 10,000 female workers in the production of their goods, which again, they met. So when I see a brand like this that is using sustainable materials, that has fair trade certification, that is B Corp certified, I'm incredibly impressed, regardless of the fact that they're owned by Gap. And I've said before, there's really only one parent company that I just say, fuck no to, and that's always Unilever. So Unilever brands, I don't touch. I feel like Gap definitely has some more work to do within their supply chain, but I also think, like I said, that there is an argument to be made that by supporting a brand that they own that is doing better than what they're doing overall, we tell them that we want to see more of this. And so for Athleta, I'm actually going to put them, well, I put Gap into my little thing, but I'm going to put them into almost perfect, because I think you can't really be perfect when you're owned by a brand like Gap, but I think other than that, they're almost there. I recently talked about Ikea in another video, which I'll link right here if you want to go check it out. I mentioned it really briefly that they offered to sponsor me, and I said no because I think their overall business model currently not up to my standards. Just can't do it just because you have a sustainable line. But I didn't really break down what they're doing right and what they're doing wrong, so let's rank Ikea according to the same thing we just ranked Athleta and H&M with. So they have a few goals that they're set out to make as well, so let's just go over those. By 2030, Ikea wants to become climate positive and regenerate resources while growing the Ikea business. They have a few different ways they plan to do this, including transforming into a circular business. This is key. Anytime a business takes the initiative to talk about circularity, they really understand the purpose of what sustainability is, and gives ode to the way indigenous people lived as a part of nature, where we don't produce waste, we are circular, along with the way nature intended. So I always love to see that. I also love to see when brands don't just talk about circularity and sustainable materials, but they talk about regeneration, which Ikea has goals of regenerative models to help the ecosystem and build biodiversity. They did publish their full 2020 sustainability report, which is a lot. You can go read it if you want. I did not read the entire thing, but I do think that publishing your own sustainability reports is good in terms of transparency. So what they're talking about here goes beyond them having a sustainable line. What they're talking about here is turning their entire business over to being more sustainable. I think that's also important to keep in mind. Then they have this little thing that is questionable to me because I know that they've had a few different environmental hazard lawsuits, and because of that broken trust already, them starting their own kind of certification system doesn't sit right with me. But they do have their own certification system for workers' rights, I guess you would say, called IWAY. IWAY is their supplier code of conduct for responsible sourcing, products, services, materials, and other components. According to them, it is a clear set of standards and expectations for environmental, social, and working conditions, as well as animal welfare for all suppliers and servicers provide that work with Ikea. So if that system is up to code with just what's legal, why would they be having lawsuits on the contrary? See, that's the context that is not provided on their website, and which makes it really difficult for someone like you and me to make a decision on if this brand is actually sustainable or not. You'd have to be up to date on what their current lawsuits are and all that sort of stuff, because right next to their code of conduct IWAY, are they going to say we're actually being sued because we weren't following said code of conduct like we are telling you we are? That's the problem with creating your own ranking system and not using a third party. What their goals are really just in line with where we see governance heading, right? A lot of times it's like, oh, they are going to do this by that time. But when you really think about it, they know that eventually there are going to be laws put into place to do said thing. And so how much credit do they get for doing something that seems just a step above the bare minimum? I think Ikea could definitely be doing more, judging by the size that they are. So I'm actually gonna put them below H&M. I definitely think they're not doing as much as H&M is. So they're going in not good. I got asked a lot about Adidas because actually Adidas and Allbirds did a collaboration, which is weird to me because why would two shoe brands collaborate? Regardless, I thought I would tell you what I assess Adidas as being in their own sustainability efforts, because I already have another video where I talk about Allbirds. I'll link it right here. And then I think that you can basically take what I say about Adidas and combine it with Allbirds and find yourself somewhere in the middle, because Adidas it's not good. Adidas was in my DMs on Instagram recently telling me that they were releasing some super sustainable something or another, I don't know. I think it was right before the Allbirds launch, so I'm guessing that's what they were talking about, but that's a hard no from me, guys. One of their biggest initiatives that they brag about on their website when it comes to sustainability is a run they host. Basically, it's you running to help them clean the oceans. So like for every kilometer you run, they'll clean up 10 plastic bottles from the ocean. I think that's basically like you track how far you're running, and then they'll pay another organization to remove some plastic waste from the ocean, which is not a bad thing. It doesn't make you a sustainable brand. It doesn't make what you're doing as a brand sustainable. It's just something else that you did on the side that's like good, but that doesn't equal a sustainable product. So obviously in some of their shoes, they use recycled materials. We love to see it. We love to see more recycled materials being used. But again, like what I said with Ikea a little bit, don't you think that basically what they're doing is what is the future anyway? Like using recycled materials should be a norm. It shouldn't be what you promote to say that you're sustainable. In the UK, there's actually a law. Basically, you have to use X amount of recycled materials in your packaging. I think it's like 20% of your materials must be recycled. And I can only see that because of the actual literal waste crisis we are facing, laws like that are going to become a lot more popular, whatever you want to call it, are going to be implemented. And so I think only making some of your shoes with some recycled materials, it's just not enough to be qualified as a sustainable brand. Especially when at the same time you're producing a lot more shoes with non-recycled materials. They also use another material made from mushrooms.
Great.
I think sustainable lines or recycled lines by brands who are at the same time pumping out a lot of shoes made with non-recycled materials, not good enough. But Adidas does have a goal, and if they meet it, I would think that this gives them a much higher ranking, okay? So one of their goals is, by 2024, to have 100% of their polyester used to be recycled. Recycled polyester in their shoes, 100%. Honestly, I think that's amazing. I think if they achieve it, that is a serious shift in the recycled materials situation. Adidas is a huge brand, and by them getting into the recycled polyester market can make it a lot more affordable and a lot more viable for the market. I think that is an incredible thing that they could do to make a really serious step. But I think it's something that they should be doing. It's not necessarily something that makes them a sustainable brand, especially if their code of ethics and how their things are produced is not clear. If they're not upfront and out loud about how their things are being produced by people paid fair wages and treated ethically, still a big question mark for me over here. But that is essentially the only part of Adidas' website that talks about sustainability. They don't talk much about their carbon footprint. They don't even outline how they're going to do better in their production line in terms of other materials other than polyester, because obviously they've got different rubbers and foams and packaging, their supply chain of how they're sourcing these materials in terms of ethics, their greenhouse gases in terms of production, shipping, packaging, all those things. The only statement really that they have on their website is that they're planning to use 100% recycled materials, which is good, but it's not enough, okay? So, Adidas, you're going next to Ikea. But honestly, like, what are you doing right now? No, I'm gonna put them in awful. Like, by 2024, if they are using 100% recycled polyester, I think they get bumped up to not good. But right now, like, we need to see some more things. Now, I know you saw the other brands in my tier maker when I've made this mistake before. You guys are like,
why didn't you talk about that other brand?
But it's just because I talk too much, and this video is already kind of the length that my videos normally are, and I don't like to make them too much longer. So if you want to see these other brands, me talk about them, let me know in the comments and I can make another part to this series. The other brands include Target, Fabletics, and Amazon's Carbon Climate Pledge line. But those are all the brands I wanted to rank in today's video. Like I said, happy to make a million more of these if you want to see it. So if you do, make sure you give this video a thumbs up. Let me know in the comments. And also, come follow me on Instagram for the next time I ask what brands you want to see me rank. Just at Shelbizleee at the top of my description. And remember, until next time, you cannot do all the good that the world needs, but the world needs all the good that you can do. Bye, guys.